I spent over $500,000 on Facebook ads in the info product space in 2025 alone. And here are 3 reasons why your ad campaigns will fail. Also 3 things that you need to avoid when scaling campaigns, when launching campaigns. Now, I know to some of you guys watching, 500K is probably pussy numbers. However, if you currently aren't spending or you're thinking about launching ads for the very first time, these are 3 things that you need to have in place before you start. And I'm telling you, if I knew this 6 months ago, a year ago, when I really started putting my foot on the gas with the paid stuff, it would have changed everything for me. Now, the number one thing, and this is especially true in the info space, is typically campaigns fail because you have a shitty sales team. You could be doing 2, 3, 400K a month organically, but if your sales team is only trained on organic leads, you're going to shit the bed with paid. The reason for this is you want to think of an organic lead as essentially like a follower of a cult. They are so indoctrinated into your content, into your beliefs, into the outcomes you've achieved that when they hop on the sales call, it's basically like, here's my credit card, take my thing. You may do a little bit of objection handling, but you'll see organic sales teams sometimes be closing at 40 to 60% clips. Now, that's a whole nother conversation I could get into in terms of pricing, offer structure, and what your close rate should look like from a sales ops perspective. But when it comes to ads, the fact that your team is able to get away with some of these sloppy sales tactics makes it extremely hard to convert on cold. Now, I want to explain this to you from my own experience. So I used to work inside of a business that was doing 20 to 50K a month organically, and they wanted to scale into paid. Now, I'll get into another point as to why this business actually failed on the paid side, but the first thing is when I would go listen to call recordings, they were doing things like, hey, how are you doing? Or they'd build rapport, like you're typically told in these big bullshit sales training programs. And all this was doing is this was killing the sales process because they didn't know how to handle a cold lead. They didn't know how to set the proper frame, how to set the proper anchors, and how to move through that sales process. Now, by no means do I claim to be a grade A closer. These guys are better closers than I were, or I am, and again, they can navigate this world better than I do. However, as a marketer and as someone who runs sales operations inside of some organizations, I can tell you right out of the gate that the sales process was broken to begin with. There's a reason coaches don't play, right? And so that's the number one thing inside of like a shit sales team is not being trained on organic. The second is if the owner leads the sales team. It follows a similar principle to the point A of this, but the big problem with the owner leading the sales team, even if you're running cold traffic, is the data is skewed. So the owner, even if they're a shit sales rep, they could be closing at, like I said, that 40 to 60% mark, even on cold traffic, because it's the face they saw in the ad. There's immediately a level of trust there where they will close at a higher rate, whether they're good or not. The other thing you'll typically see is the owner is usually the best sales rep because they have the most conviction about the product. And so this is why the owner-led sales team is also a big flaw. It's a big red flag to look for if you go to scale into paid. Now, that is less detrimental as being only trained on organic, but if it's owner-led, you really need to vet the sales process to see why people are closing. The other thing in the beginning, especially in the beginning, is you want to make sure your campaigns are profitable. And so if you are a rep and you need to pull the owner onto the call to help close that deal, you do it. The most important part with paid advertising from day one, in my personal opinion, from my experience, is going to be pulling as much cash forward as possible. If you sit in this burn and break even period for too long, not that you won't see success, but it will drive you crazy, especially if you're hovering over the spend. If you're not used to spending 15 to 30K a month on a test budget, you're going to crumble without pulling cash forward. And so this is why I recommend every owner to either take sales calls to start, but understand the flaw in this, or hop on calls with closers if they need a little help pushing it over the line. Outside of that, you want to look for these 2 red flags when you're going to launch the campaign, because the second you transition to cold, the sales process is going to shift. Now, the third part to this, and I'll touch on this a little bit later as well, is typically speaking, the ops are not built to handle paid. This usually means people have basically been, I see a lot of offer owners shoot from the hip when running the business. So there's no real tracking. It's pretty shitty on the back end. They're basically just looking at WAP, Stripe, Teachable, Kajabi, whatever payment processor they're using. They're looking at that on the back end, and they have no idea what the numbers are. This becomes a serious problem with paid because it's not about bottom of funnel when you launch. The ROAS and the cash collected and the revenue, it's great. It's a cool metric to look at. But when you launch a campaign, that is not where the leverage is at. The leverage is down funnel. It's understanding what are click-through rates, what are show rates, what are close rates, what are book call to close, what are live call to close rates, what do opt-in rates look like, what does this messaging do to this type of lead. And you're essentially looking down funnel to make tweaks in the process to increase throughput on the back end and increase the ROAS of the campaign. However, if I don't have proper ops, one, I can't track, but the other thing that's more sales specific is a lot of people will slip through the cracks. This is improper handoff processes. This is improper setting processes, improper closing processes, improper CRM management, improper sales automations, pre-call stuff, post-call stuff, no-show stuff, reschedule stuff, cancellation stuff. Like if you don't have these gaps plugged and the ops in place to scale into these things, it becomes very, very, very hard to launch and scale paid predictably. And so that is the number one thing to pay attention to. And the number one thing I always vet my clients for is a good or a shit sales team. This typically will come down to, as an agency, closer referrals or looking at sales calls before I even take on the deal. And so this is one thing where you've got to be willing, as an agency owner, you've got to be willing to walk away from a shitty offer if the sales team sucks. So that is the number one thing with why your campaigns will fail. Now, the number two concept builds on this ops thing, and it's a lack of data collection. Now, this can happen for three reasons. Number one, you aren't spending enough. So typically when we take on a client, especially now, we work with a test budget at minimum $15K, on average around $30K in terms of spend to get a good gauge as to how the campaign's performing. If you don't spend enough, you run into a time issue, which kind of bridges into the second point of this concept, is you aren't giving the campaign enough time. When we first started running ads for offers, we did not understand how ads worked. Now, we did to a degree. We had profitable campaigns, but we weren't getting consistent results for clients. And after working on over a dozen of offers, the biggest thing we've noticed is it's a lack of spend. If you can't spend $500 to $1,000 a day on day one, it's probably not worth scaling into ads, because you need to compress the time to get results. I want to lay this out mathematically for you. If I spend $100 a day on ads, which to some people sounds like a lot of money. If I spend $100 a day, that's $3,000 a month. If I sell a $7,000 product, and I'm assuming break even on the initial testing phase, it's going to take me a little over 2 months just to break even. At that point, you can sell yourself out of running ads. There's an offer I'm currently on that's struggling due to a sales team consistency issue, which again goes back on the lack of consistency of data. And so we're break even on the campaign after 30, 45 days, but it's very, very hard for me to look that business owner in the eye and say, these are the pivots we need to make, because there's not enough consistency. And we're only spending $400 or $500 a day without the sales side consistency. And so one, it comes down to spending enough, but then two, it's giving the campaign time. So the way to mitigate this is if I take that same timeline of assuming I break even in the test budget. If I spend $1,000 a day, it's going to take me a week to break even on the campaign. $500 a day, it's going to take me 2 weeks. And so that's what I'm looking for, right? Is if I'm able to spend enough, then I can break even faster, or I can see results faster to then pivot from. Because you're paying for two things with paid advertising. You're going to pay with either your time or your money. And I recommend every single business owner just pay with their time up front. Take the risk, compress the time, get the data, move. The problem with if you take too long, or if you don't spend enough, you end up pivoting too fast, because you spend, let's say, $1,000, or you don't have the sales team consistency. Like I'll take the thing we're dealing with, for example. We've had 3 sales reps come on in a month, and it's a 1 closer model. So it's 3 reps churning in and out. We're working with a pretty big sales agency, so they have the sales process dialed in. I'll give them that. But the offer, we're not spending enough, and we haven't spent long enough to create consistency and show. We're not able to verify the model. Same with just tech issues on the marketing side as well. So there's a whole bunch of things going wrong. And what happens is we don't have enough data for me to look this offer owner in the eye and say, let's put our foot on the gas or let's pivot. And so what happens if you don't have someone that's seen this type of thing is they end up shifting too fast. And so I had to look at one of the sales managers and say, I know where you're coming from. I know the principle you're taking, but realistically, I cannot say let's shift angles because we don't know. The other thing is when you're running high ticket offers, it may take a while, right? This is a $25K price point. And so if we're only spending $500 a day and it's $25K, it could take 2 months at that spend just to break even. So to sum up the little ramble on part 2 is you need to spend enough to get results. You need to be patient, and you can't be pivoting too fast. You need consistency in data, because with advertising, like I mentioned in point 1, it's based on the data. You're looking down funnel and you're saying, I'm going to tweak this, I'm going to tweak that, and I'm going to tweak this to increase ROAS on the back end, right? If I don't have the data, I can't make those strategic decisions, because at the end of the day, the one thing that everyone has this misconception about is I hear all the time, well, ads don't work for me, or ads won't work for me. Ads work for everybody. They work for literally everybody if you know what you're doing. It is the only way to scale a business consistently. And if you refuse to run ads or learn how to run ads or work with someone that run ads or give them the time of day to do what they do best, you will never figure it out, and it's a limiting belief that's crippling your business. And so this is, again, one of the big issues I see with new advertisers and new ad campaigns is they're not collecting enough data, they're not spending enough, they're not giving the campaign time, and they're pivoting too fast on the model or on the ads themselves. Now, the last thing I see, and this is one that's not talked about enough in the space, is you have a broken monetization model. So this kind of goes back to data collection, but it's a little bit different. When I say monetization model, essentially I mean, what is the LTV on the average client? What is the AOV on the average client? So what is the average order value? What is the lifetime value of that customer? And the reason that the monetization model is so important is because sometimes if you are willing to, and if you're comfortable with it, you sacrifice front-end ROAS for back-end upsells. This is common in 2 situations, so I want to paint this picture for you. One, what you'll see very, very often is these what are called low ticket funnels. So these would be something like what Jeremy Miner does with 7Level and the $27 Black Book. You see this, I recently saw Josh Troy, who's a great sales agency. He had one that was like a $27 thing on hiring sales reps, which I paid for myself. And what a low ticket does is it'll get you to then book an implementation call, and then they upsell you into something. Now, the monetization model on this, typically you run at a loss on the low ticket, and you're able to make money on the upsell in the back end. And so the monetization models, I'm willing to take a loss for a upsell in the back end. Another example of this, in terms of understanding monetization models, and just a way to visualize this really well, is a SaaS company. Now, a software company, typically what you'll see is like a 0.6 return on ad spend in the beginning. So the amount of cash they liquidate on an ad campaign is like a 0.6. However, they know that in month 3, if they keep their churn rate down, they're running at a 3 to 4x return on ad spend. And so they are comfortable taking in and spending a bunch of money because they know in month 3, they're extremely profitable and it starts to compound on itself. This is also the reason investors are so willing to invest a bunch of capital and money into SaaS specifically, because of the LTV, the monetization model on the back end. It's why you see those types of businesses see the highest multiples upon exit. It's why certain service-based businesses see high exits based on the recurring. take a long landscaping business, for example. If I mow the same lawn once a week, every week, and I've had that account for 2 years, the LTV on that client could be 10 grand. I want to say, I can't remember who talks about the Starbucks model. I don't take credit for it at all, but I think Starbucks' LTV is like $14,000. So they're willing to spend up to $5,000 or whatever it is in advertising per customer because they know on the back end they get 14K because they understand the monetization model. This is why financially modeling is so important, both on the monetization side but also the funnel side, because I need to know what the breaking points are in the funnel. I need to know when to pump the brakes and say, okay, let's hold spend here, or let's not scale up, or let's fix this before we scale up. Right? I need to know what base KPIs are, what's base close rate, what's base show rate, what's base click-through, what's base cost per call, what's base CPM, what's base hook, hold, what's base conversion rate, what's base show rate, like all these different things. And then on the back end, what's the average cash collected on front end? What's the average revenue? What's the ascension rate? What's the upsell take? What's the AOV on front end? What's the LTV on back end? I need to understand these things before I run the campaign, because if I don't, shit will break or it may not seem profitable on the front end. And this leads me to my second point within this sub point of a broken monetization model is if you aren't paying attention to cash conversion cycles, it becomes very difficult. For example, a campaign I'm on, again, it's a 25K product, and we ran a webinar 2 weeks ago. We may not see a close from that webinar until this Friday. And so there is a 2-week period where we do not see the results of a campaign. And there was a conversion event that occurred because of the cash conversion cycle. This is not only on front-end cash, but this also occurs on back-end revenue collected after the fact. So if I have a 6K and I do a 3Pay, that means I get front-end cash of 2K, but I'm going to have another 2K coming in each month for the next 3 months. And so I need to understand the cash cycles, because this allows me as a advertiser to just scale extremely profitably into campaigns. If I don't understand cash and I don't understand the risk I'm taking from a cash and cash flow perspective, I could break my business very, very fast. I could also limit myself from scaling when I have a very clear path to hitting those 6-figure to $1 million months. And then the last issue I see all the time is you have no upsells or you sell one offer. Now, this is one of the easiest things to fix for 2 reasons. One, your offers should always build on one another. They should never be completely separate. So if I sell a high ticket with one-on-one and group calls, then I should have a mid ticket with group calls and a little limited coach or limited course content relative to the top. And then at the bottom, I should have just straight digital course. What this allows me to do is operationally, nothing really changes with fulfillment. However, what I can now do is I can downsell or I can upsell based on the offer. So what you can do after you have enough data, going back to point number 2, is I can see, okay, we're closing a lot of the number 2 offer on the front end. So let's just optimize for those types of clients. Now what we do is when they hop on call, we give the opportunity to upsell or downsell to the sales rep. And what they can then do is, again, create more LTV and increase your AOV on the back end because you have these big things. Now, the one thing to be careful with, and I won't touch on it too much, is if you give the opportunity for a rep to downsell, they typically will take it, and you'll see a dip in your ROAS. So you want to be very, very careful with this. You want to set expectations here, and sometimes you only want to let shitty reps downsell so that they can at least pull cash in the door and get some kind of bump in morale. But again, even that I hesitate on. I say it with a ton of caution, and I don't fully stand by that because I don't have the data to back that statement. However, you need to have upsells and you need to have downsells to, again, increase that AOV. Typically what you'll see is there's another offer I'm on where it's a school community. So we push people to this $27 school community. Typically within a 3 to 4 month period, they ascend into our high ticket. And so because we have the upsell, if we look at the ROAS on the ad campaign, it's a lot higher after the fact because we have those upsells and because we have a monetization model that allows us to scale up. And so we have our 21K, we have our 20, 21K, we have our 15K, and then we have our 7K or 7 or 9K product, and then our low ticket. And so we can take this customer and we can basically just bump them up based on their needs or put them where they go and maximize cash and contract value per client. So to kind of sum up the rant here, these are 3 reasons why your paid ads campaigns will fail. These are 3 things that I wish I understood when I first started. And these are 3 reasons why you should not run ads, why you should continue to run ads, and what you should do to increase your likelihood of running ads profitably. Is, again, really audit the sales process and your sales team. Really make sure you have good sales ops and just ops in general. 2, make sure you're collecting data. Don't pivot too fast. Establish consistency before you make any decisions with the advertising efforts. And be okay with a burn rate. Be okay with a burn rate. Be okay with a break-even rate, because you're looking at the data. You're not looking at ROAS to start. As you scale, yes, you're watching it. But at that point, you have a system that works. In the beginning, you need to figure out what the system is. And if you're running straight paid, you have to be okay with the burn. And then the last one is just a broken monetization model. If you're not financially modeling, if you aren't paying attention to cash cycles, and if you don't have any upsells, you're leaving a lot of money on the table, and you also don't understand how aggressively you can spend for that campaign. So hope that helps. This is just what I've learned. This is what I've learned from my experiences. Again, spending over $500,000 on paid advertising in 2025 alone. I know to some of you guys, this is probably pussy numbers, but hopefully this helps you in some way. If you are curious to learn a little bit more or just get more content like this consistently, down below, I'm actually going to have a link to a weekly newsletter. I call it weekly. I'm going to be releasing shit kind of randomly. So just subscribe, first name, email, and then we'll be sending emails pretty much once a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. But stuff like this, stuff conceptually in the marketing end, and then even just life updates if you're curious to learn about a random fucker on the internet. Other thing is, if you like content like this, I typically will go in depth into ad campaigns, high-level strategy for paid advertising, the info product space, what I've learned based on where I'm at. None of what I say I take as fact or tell you that you should do. I just speak from experience and what I've learned inside of multiple offers doing over $500,000 a month from both paid ads and organic, and what that back-end ops and selling system looks like. So hopefully that helps. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe. If you want to join the newsletter, there's going to be a link down in the description. You can click that, sign up, see what kind of bullshit we send your way. And if you are curious to run paid ads for your business, there will also be a link to book a call with myself or a member of my team to dive into if you have the infrastructure that's solid enough to begin scaling. And if not, we can point you in the right direction so that you can come back to us and say, hey guys, we're ready to scale. Let's get this paid ads journey started. So hopefully that helps, and I will see you in the next one.